The internet is so mind-bogglingly simple as a concept that it's hard for people to grasp.
Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell. I'm at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. Today I'm speaking with Bob Frankston, who I'm going to guess is in the Boston vicinity.
Yes, I am.
And you can find Bob's writings at frankston.com. And Bob, you've been someone who's been working on this stuff. We were just talking about it, but for quite some time. One of the things you've done that I've always thought was the coolest thing is that you enabled home networking. And we're going to start there and talk more about your views of internet access, networking, more importantly, communications. And I should also say that we spoke last in 2014. So it's been a minute, but you have been on the show before, and I'm excited to get back into it with you.
You mentioning brings back, lots of memories and background, because if you think about home networking, this was the mid-90s, and broadband, everything we knew. And remember, these were the cable TV companies. They were used to charging with set-top boxes, and they wanted to charge for each PC because it was just like as if they were giving you a modem. Each IP address was treated as a dial-up line. That was the mindset. Now, we have to go back, let's say, 60 years to the origins. Because I was not only interested in computers, I was interested in a lot of areas like psycholinguistics, AI, and things. And all these concepts of developmental psychology come into play, as we'll see. But I remember one class I took, this was in 1973. We studied AlohaNet. Now, AlohaNet was a hack, you can call it. It was really a network, really research. It was called, when people do something at a university called research, I don't like fancy words like that. So the problem was in Hawaii, how do you interconnect all the computers at high speed without spending a lot of money on leased lines and everything? Use radios. The problem is radios are not reliable. So what was possible by the 1970s was departments had workgroup computers. So instead of having the phone company take responsibility for reliability, they would just program around it. If the packet was lost, well, you write a subroutine that retries. A very simple algorithm. But what it suddenly meant, we really didn't appreciate it back then, is those radios did not form a telecom network. They formed a network, but the problem is we talk about a telecommunications network. We're talking about a very physical wires. And as I mentioned to you earlier, the word network is so nonspecific, we can both use the word network and mean entirely different things.
One of the things, as you're describing that, what I'm trying to imagine, first of all, I have trouble imagining how one uses radio to communicate, because in my mind, I didn't grow up taking apart radios. But let's leave that aside for a second. What I think the audience should be familiar with is that if you're designing a communication system, and I don't want to get lost in this, but you kind of have two choices. One is you can have like a system that is sort of very intelligent, and in some entity or device is choosing how everything talks, when they talk, and making decisions like that. And the other is that every device on the network has a simple set of instructions that it can use to try to communicate. And the first system, I think, is quite brittle, because you have to have such a complex system that can control so many different possibilities, it's bound to fail. What you're talking about, what you had, was these devices and people that had a set of simple instructions. And if they follow them, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't at a given time. But if they follow them over and over again, they will be able to communicate.
It's actually much more subtle and deeper than that. The network is an application, not a physical thing, number one.
The network is an application, not a physical thing.
Networking was a technique. You did networking. There was no physical network. You did networking over anything available.
There are physical things that are involved, but that is not the network.
You can use facilities. You can send postcards. Same thing. You didn't need radios. You can send postcards. A little slower, but that'll work.
Okay.
In London, in fact, in the early 1900s, you get a few mail deliveries a day. You can exchange postcards back and forth and have a conversation. We forget all this, pneumatic tubes. There are all sorts of techniques. But that's the important thing is the concept of telecommunication network goes back to Phidippides and before when you had runners carrying messages. So the big invention was to carry a message reliably using a telegraph. And that was modeled after the post office. In other words, you gave responsibility for delivery of the message to the courier. That's the way communication networks worked until the 1970s. You had the network take responsibility for delivery. Now, the thing about what Aloha showed is you didn't need the network to take responsibility. There's a fundamental conceptual difference between the ARPANET and the internet. Unfortunately, we use the term internet because we did such a good job, we didn't have to confront the difference in meaning. That the fundamental and paradigmatic difference between the internet and the ARPANET is the ARPANET took responsibility. The internet, nobody anywhere takes full responsibility for delivery. They don't even know what they're carrying. So basically, anything you want gets encoded as bits with no trace of the meaning. One of my essays on these are the keywords is VoIP inflection. So voice over IP was an inflection point because Claude Shannon digitized analog communication. He emulated the analog communications system. What VoIP does is took a fundamentally different approach. It turned everything into tokens. It's a fundamentally different concept because everything was encoded meaningless tokens. And you didn't even depend on all those tokens. So I point out, if you send the word hello, you might, encode the phonemes and tokens. But if you missed a few, no big deal. You could program around it. If you think about it, the one problem I'm getting very far afield, but it's all, problem is everything is relevant. There's a lot of background. Um, you would hear a click in traditional things because you had dumb endpoints. You had two tin cans and a string, which is basically what telecommunications is, a microphone, a speaker, and a long wire. All the telecom companies did was preserve that wire over a distance. They stretched that wire electronically to preserve the waveform. But if you lost it, you'd hear a big click. Well, once you have computers at both ends, they knew how to bridge the gap. They can fill in the blanks. They can buffer a little, just a few milliseconds, and that's how VoIP works. But they can also, that was the early stage, you could just program around it a little bridging. What is profound is with VoIP is you can now reassemble the packets out of order, handle jitter. And the interesting thing about VoIP, it was not invented as much as discovered. That the origin story from Vocaltech is they were using this nice algorithm with a little buffer inside their office. They were surprised to see people using it on the open internet.
Hmm.
And the reason it happened is important to understand. It did not happen because anybody did anything to enable it. What you had was a virtuous cycle which increased capacity so that you saw the odds of it working were high. And this is very fortunate because we actually did this experiment. We built two networks. One where there was no guarantees, VoIP couldn't work, and it took 50 years for VoIP to start working. We did another one where we built VoIP in, where you could pay somebody to get first dibs, to get priority, to get a guaranteed path. It cost $1 trillion, and it would cost you back with inflation $10 a minute to call across the country, but you got it to work. And which one survived? Right now, we don't, the telecommunications, entire telecommunications industry running in emulation mode. It's a fake. And that goes back to the idea that you needed to preserve the waveform. So let me go back to that class in 1973. There was a kid sitting next to me in class doing a cute little project. I remember when he was announcing class, I scooted back to listen. So instead of using the over the air where the FCC ruled, he used the coaxial cable as the ether.
I'm thinking this is a guy named Bob also.
Bob Metcalf, yes. So I just happened to be there when he first announced his class project.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So this is getting us back to home networking and sort of some of the the thought that you had, the background you had, why you thought what you're about to describe was important. But to give people a sense of what you've been talking about here, is that we have seen empirical evidence. We've tried it. We've run the experiments to see whether a more centralized, complicated system is able to handle certain tasks or a more simple system. And your point is that even my discussing it in that way is missing the point that you can communicate in any number of ways.
What does it mean to communicate?
Yeah, I mean, this is I sort of feel like you're a professor now, and I'm like on the spot.
Yeah, telecommunications. The word we have the word telecommunications because 200 years ago, sending a letter was the only way to communicate.
Right, which is about moving information from one point to another point in my mind.
But not really, because that's the freight model. It's really getting somebody to understand what you're saying. That has nothing to do with the wires. And this is where the psycholinguistic background is 100% outside the facilities. In other words, let me give you a message. How many bits does it take to go somewhere?
I have no idea.
No, that's not the right answer. The answer is that's a stupid question.
Okay.
And how many bits are in a pause versus a pregnant pause?
Well, it would depend on the encoding scheme.
No, it doesn't. The answer, again, that's a
Right.
stupid question.
Okay.
The reason why we can even form that question is Claude Shannon. He defined an abstract model will clock a certain bit rate on the wire. So you could say a 1 second pause takes so many bits because that's a clock time. That's nothing to do with the real world. That the
Mhm.
mathematical models have absolutely nothing to do with how we communicate. And that's the problem with all of these words. They embed a certain theory of what it means to communicate. And then we build a system that based on that. And it turns out, according to simple control, creates scarcity by necessity.
Okay, so if I'm following, what you're discussing and your corrections with me are that don't get frustrated if I'm missing this.
No, don't worry. I'm very well aware. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is
No, what I was gonna say that what I feel like your a key point is that we have systems that were designed by people that don't understand how humans really communicate, and now the way the system works has influenced the way we think we communicate.
actually, I'll give Al Bell more credit than that. He knew how people communicate. Because remember, he was a teacher of the deaf.
Did you know him? You're calling him Al?
Well, he's a local guy.
I thought, yeah, he probably
I'm
is.
trying
Yeah,
to humanize it. Actually, I won't get over the Elisha Gray story. You know that. That Bell maybe stole the patent from
right.
Elisha Gray,
Yeah,
who retired about 2 miles away from here, too. It's
yeah.
all local. And I think, actually, there's a little sidebar here. One of the things about being in the middle of all this is that I get it. This is real. In other words, I actually played with the people, know the people, friends of mine who keep, doing the internet, all this. And that's in other words, this is not an abstract thing you can't understand. It's all simple stuff. And the point is, the internet is so mind-bogglingly simple as a concept that it's hard for people to grasp.
Yes, I
They
agree.
think there must be more mechanism to that. Which let me one more story before I get to the whole networking. So Bob Metcalf, his advisors were telecommunications specialists. So he had to prove to them in his thesis that it's an efficient use of a coaxial cable, which is utterly absurd. Who cares? And those of us, I was excited. 2.994 megabits, which as it reminds me, was the speed. That was so far beyond motor speed. Even if we ran at 10% of that, we'd be thrilled.
Hmm.
We were so used to thinking of communications in a certain way, and telecommunications in particular, that it never entered the head of who cares. And this is why, getting a little ahead, I want to create the opportunity for discovery rather than making this building all these things in. Just create opportunity. And what's separating the bits from the meaning means you now have this fungible connectivity, which is a resource with no promises, and discover the table. Now, do you know what else is based on this idea of separating meaning from the tokens?
No.
LLMs.
Oh, right.
All of AI is based on meaning not being inherent. So that's another essay I can give you, which goes into that abstract thing, but that scares people even worse than Copernicus did. So I was exposed to Ethernet as something you did yourself. You could just run wires around a computer and locally it would just work. Now, getting back to your comment about how do you build networks. Well, again, broadcast networks, you build them by getting people to work together, cooperate shows, any kind of thing is a network. So the way you scale into the Ethernet is you bridge the networks. Okay, is one way. That was learning bridges, and that doesn't scale enough. So then you come up with an internetworking protocol which basically says any facilities we want, we can use to network. And Ethernet is a facility we use. The packets on the Ethernet are not IP packets, they're Ethernet packets. And that becomes a resource, not a dependency. So again, I can easily get far too much into the details, but jumping ahead to home networking, this was the mid 90s. Broadband was new. Actually, a DSL was repurposed 1950s technology, but that's another story. So I realized that within a home or local network, you didn't need all this fancy stuff. Because at that point, home networking meant home control. People were very confused. You built purpose-built system for each purpose. And what I knew from my experience is that all we need to do was exchange packets and that would work. Remember, there are two things I say remember. You might remember, but most of your listeners probably don't. There were a couple of things about that. One at the time is that the idea of people running their own networks was considered impossible. I mean, networks, you need real network engineers, rocket scientists, or something, as if throwing a rock at the moon was that big up a hard problem.
At this point, most homes have zero computers in them. Some homes have one computer in them. And so
Yes, and when I was at Microsoft trying to explain what I was doing, they didn't understand it. Why would you? Nobody wants more than one computer at a home.
right. And so I remember the only time my home had multiple computers was when I tell this story frequently, was when friends of mine wanted to play Doom on Doom 2, and you could do four-person networking. And so we would take the computers from their parents and bring them over to my house. And in the basement, we would try to figure out. I learned networking by trying to learn how to play video games on multiple computers. And
Oh, yeah,
so
and you learned something you could do yourself.
right, right, and that was exactly it. You follow instructions on the internet, and it doesn't work, and you follow a different set of instructions, and that doesn't work. But then you start learning between the two and figuring it out, and eventually you find something that works. And by then, you've either forgotten how you got it to work, or you've lost interest. And either way, you never document it for the next person. That's one of the key things I learned.
Yes. By the way, it just is a little side story. I remember I visited Paris for Microsoft back about 96. I remember we went down past Versailles about everything, but they were going to show me something wonderful. It was basically people were playing video games on land in a house. So much for the exotic powers of Versailles.
Right, but this is not a time when many people were imagining homes having multiple computers, let alone tens of devices.
You might want to do this as a multi-episode because there's so much to go into here. Okay, the key thing I learned from that class is that if you throw packets on an Ethernet, eventually they'll get through. And that's all I had to do. But the other part of it is my career started, it was on Wall Street actually. But aside from learning about the underbelly of Wall Street, again, I was online in 66, I was creating software for people. So my career is creating tools for others, not giving them solutions, giving them tools and power. Okay. So part of my thing was how do you make it? So one thing about spreadsheets when Dan and I were doing it was I did not think of it as a program. The program was just the means. We were creating an experience, an illusion. And if you forgot you were using spreadsheets computer, that was a Zen experience. You were getting into the task. So one of my ironclad rules for home networking was no installer. I mean, some people would eventually get it. So I try to look at everything that made it hard. Now, by the way, if you want the background story to why I did home networking, was my wife's fault.
Okay.
You had Microsoft people wanting me to move to Seattle. You had my wife who didn't want to move. Guess who won?
Well, you're not in Seattle right now.
Yes. That was actually combined with ADHD. Fortunate. I probably would have been kicked out of Microsoft much sooner. But so I had multiple computers at home, of course. So I networked all my computers at home. But what I discovered was a technique called the NAT, Network Address Translation. It allowed me to share a single connection to the world. So I can make my home part of the internet, not just dial into it, but become part of the internet. And that's the real philosophical shift because back in that point, you would dial in periodically, get online, then get off.
Hmm.
We wouldn't just have messages pop up saying there is mail and all this. This is why AOL's message was such a big deal back then. So I went into this attitude of I want to interconnect people with the internet. It was a time when broadband was becoming available. Now, what's broadband? There's a whole history of the word, but basically it means fat pipe,
Right. Always on fat pipe.
always on fat pipe. But don't worry, pretty little, but that's not, you don't worry about it. You get a phone call. The phone company will use it to give you services, or the cable company. You want another phone line? They'll key in a message and now you have a phone line. This is VoIP, except you're paying $30 a month instead of $0 a month for each VoIP line. You want to basically do home shopping, they would do the home shopping for you. So broadband was basically a way for the phone companies to deliver all these services. And that's why AT&T spent an exorbitant amount for Media One, because they thought they'd monetize all the services. By putting the NAT there, suddenly that pipe was turned around. All they saw were meaningless packets that they could not monetize.
Because they didn't know what service it was. They had
There was the service didn't necessarily exist. Yes,
yeah.
in the days when there's still multiple phone lines for other purposes, they were puzzled. There was a dial tone on the line that should have been empty. It turns out it was coming from inside my house, as the old joke goes, because I always had a VoIP device.
Hmm. Right, but they were the mindset of you think like fax machines and other things where you're paying for a line per device, then so they can.
Yeah, but it's full price for each line for each device.
Right. And so your NAT allowed the homeowner to then start putting different devices in and didn't need permission from the network owner, didn't have to pay an extra fee to do it. And then they were actually in charge of their own network. And this is something that we talk about when I'm doing the tribal broadband boot camps and other things, is that, we feel like networking is super hard, and yet almost everyone has built their network in their house themselves.
In 1995, when I was trying to say networking is easy, even a child can do it. In those days, only a child can do it, but see, I was too confused. Yeah, that was mind-bogglingly simple because all we had was the packets. Same for home control. You didn't need to build a special network for home control, though that took a while. But so the way it sold this idea at Microsoft was sharing the web. That two people at home share the web. Now, as I said, it was a hard sell because why would you have two computers at home those days? You know, that's what marketing was telling me. Luckily, because of VisiCalc, I was able to get away with doing it anyway. So that was basically the value proposition. You can share the web connection. And if you think about it, when I take credit for home networking, you say it was so simple. I didn't really do much. I just took an off-the-shelf NAT, put it into Windows. I designed an auto configuration, but once DHCP came out, I just went with DHCP, which wasn't as good as what I was doing, but
And let's pause for a second, because I do think an alternate history in which people have to pay per device, and these companies are trying to figure out how to maximize their revenues. They're probably thinking that they're going to be charging a lot per device, and then that would lead to a situation where people are less likely to have home devices.
let me make it more extreme than that.
Okay.
Okay. In those days, the idea of IP, remember, IP was considered complicated. People said you couldn't put IP on a small device. We know, of course, absurd. That's absurd because there's no protocol simpler than IP. So that was part of the mindset that you do everything for its purpose. So we had all these, but the other thing is we wanted to build smarts into the protocols. But the key thing, again, we go many directions, but I want to focus on one aspect. So there are two reasons I take credit for home networking. One is imagine if Microsoft didn't build into Windows. Yes, you can have hackers do it. Some people would do it, but none of that succeeds.
Hmm.
I mean, so having to put it there, having the being in the position to put it into Windows, and it took a while. I had to sneak it in. You know your hotspot in Windows
Yes.
now. That's one of the side byproducts of putting the NAT into Windows. So it was basically a very simple thing. The other thing I tried to do was no new wires networking. I was overkill because the idea was you could use phone wires to do networking, messy phone wires, and not interfere with the dial tone. That might have caught on, but fortunately, Wi-Fi came in time. Though, if you remember, it took years for Wi-Fi. But the important point is, if I try to explain to people the future of all these IP devices, that wouldn't work. They wouldn't understand. And if anything, I think that's far greater value than simply the web access. And the web, by the way, is a great story of the virtuous cycle playing out. Tim Berners-Lee didn't create a single solution. He created the ability for people to create this solution, just like people think spreadsheets are financial tools. No, they're just scraps of paper. So, and packets are just fungible packets. And so, because broadband was there, I was able to repurpose the broadband facilities. Unfortunately, broadband has turned toxic in the following sense. The story I sometimes tell is think of a bicycle trail. How do you build a bicycle trail? Well, you find an abandoned railroad track and you repurpose it.
Right, because you want something that's relatively flat that goes a long way without interruptions and turns, and it's hard to do that in most areas because people own the land, and you need something that has right of way.
Right. But what if people take away, in order to build more trails, you need to have more tracks. So they start laying down more tracks just to repurpose them.
Right, this is something that we think of as path dependence, which I think is like a fancy term for what you're describing, right?
Exactly. So people think they need, quote, broadband. The problem is broadband is the anti-internet. We're able to repurpose the pipe, just like the internet repurposed the entire telecommunication network is just one segment, one hop. Fortunately, I saw it before we had dial. I mean, the whole dial-up internet is a story that happened because universities shared among themselves for free. But then we had bulletin board systems that stuck back ends into the universities to get on this larger internet. It was not an infrastructure, so you had to find some way to get to it, which is double down on the old model. So the reason we talk about accessing the internet is that's the way it dialed up. You would dial up a modem into AOL and then stay on all day. That was, and then back end into the internet. Now, by the way, a little sidebar. The reason that the U.S. led here is because we didn't trust the phone companies. Europe, they trusted the phone companies, so there was no unmeasured service. We had unmeasured service. In the U.S., was just cheaper than detailed billing. That led us to talk about access, and basically the internet was treated as just another long distance. Oh, you listeners won't remember the days when you were signing for a long distance carrier and a local carrier separately.
I do remember that as well, and and then the abuses that also came from all kinds of new names for things where people would switch their long distance carrier and to one that charged them more, and
Well, that's like how many people call you every day to sell you new energy plans?
mhm. I don't live in one of those states, fortunately, so it's not my issue. But some of the listeners do, I'm sure.
No, yeah, yeah. There's scammers everywhere. But when you sign up for DSL, it was DSL from a phone company. You would sign up for a separate internet company and a long distance company when you signed up for your DSL line.
Right, and but before that, I think what I would say is kind of the glory days. There was multiple companies in every metro that had modem banks, and we could use the system to make that phone call connect to who we wanted to. It was as DSL became more important as we wanted faster connections that a series of government decisions allowed the telephone company, the sort of the monopoly of the area, effectively to kind of take everything back over. And that's I think what you're heading toward is that we made a series of decisions, and we believe now that our only options for communicating over the internet is to go through broadband from one of these large companies that built a network for other purposes decades ago.
Yes. So there are lots of different directions, but let me follow this one in particular. What is the proper model for broadband? Now, so you know the origin story of Comcast?
No, I know there's a small company that bought a ton of other companies.
But you know why a group of haberdashers bought Comcast in the
No,
first.
I do not know.
Because this is their own story. I'm not making this up. It's direct from the head. They were haberdashers. Sansa pants came out. They thought
I
there'd be
don't
no
know.
longer
I
be a
barely know what a
market for
haberdasher is. I don't know
suspenders.
what those bands
Oh,
are.
they sell ties and belts,
Mhm.
suspenders.
Okay.
Okay, well, Truman was a haberdasher for a while. You have to know these words like millinery and things. Crossword puzzles help. Uh, so they were spooked. So they bought this company that basically did remote antenna. And then years later, they discovered they could do other things, which they had the whole broadband,
Hmm.
all this capacity. They were not limited by it over the air. So it took a while to discover. Then they eventually got, TBS, CNN, Ted Turner, all these evolutions along that path. But they were still building on they own the facilities model. And the facilities are there for this one purpose. Now roll forward, and now that we have fungible packets, we've totally split. Those services are no longer in the wire. Okay. So if you think of it, there was a days when trolleys would offer you a ride. But once you discovered you could own a car and do it yourself, the business model of roads is very different than the business model of railroads. They're fundamentally different concepts. Now, unfortunately, financial analysts say they're all transportation. No, they're not. Roads are macadam, pavement that you can tear up. Trade and sell your rides. And there's a good book by Robin White called Railroaded. Wonderful, he's a great writer, wonderful history of railroads, the creation of the ICC. So both railroads and the phone companies provided a service. One was rides, the other was carrying your messages freight. So they're very eerily similar. And we're talking about the long distance railroads in the West, which offered all these facilities. But the problem they had was first, the facilities were a cost of doing business.
Right. I was just going to say, I mean, this is where I read that book and a few others about them. My takeaway, which I wish I had known more when I picked it up, because when you're new to something, it's harder to figure out what the important bits are. But my takeaway was that the railroads were built by people who were seeking to use financial tricks to get rich, and they happened to have to build railroads as a part of their con, more or less. And
I'm not quite that skeptical. Even if they wanted to do well, there was no way that when you have high capital costs and no differentiation, the business would work. So
yes.
the ICC was a solution to that.
Yes. Yeah, the Interstate Commerce Commission.
Right. Now, what other business had high capital costs and no differentiation? Phone companies.
Right.
And you know where the FCC came from.
From the ICC, but long
Yes.
after we already had, the government struck the deal with Vail in order to
Well,
create
it
the,
was fun. Yes.
yeah.
I mean, the history. But the point is that both markets were broken, and at the best idea we had was regulation to fix it. And that's, I view, people demonize regulation. They forget government's the way we work together, corporation creation of government. So
Mhm.
these are all attempts to make things work, unlike we won't discuss the brain dead people now. So the ICC went away because railroads offered a better solution to competition, no longer had a choke point. They had Department of Transportation. Now, people can game Department of Transportation, all that, but that's another topic. So the best thing we can do in 1934 was to have a managed marketplace to assure communication. This is where AT&T became like the post office, a quasi-governmental company, lavishly funded for research because they were guaranteed a return on their investment. And they were also legitimized by the idea that you needed to preserve the waveform in order for us to carry speech. So when you didn't have a wire, we created a virtual wire out of whole cloth with spectrum allocation, which is one of the worst algorithms ever.
Because we're not using the spectrum very
Well,
efficiently.
it's worse than that. It creates dead zones. I
Mhm.
mean, it's not, I mean, efficiency is a measure. Let's say we took the abundant commons and split it up. It's as if we put separate narrow lanes. I mean, it turns out, now we'll get to a way to work around that, a solution. So spectrum allocation basically, there are only so many frequencies. It's just like, when Newton said there are only seven colors, which meant you have only seven people in a room because they eat. How else would you distinguish between people except use the shirt color? So it's the same kind of thing. So the solution to this broken marketplace was basically licensing. So we created all the phone companies and all this. What happened, the reason why AlohaNet was, it showed us, if we turn it all into packets, first it shows a technique. Again, when you're in the middle of this, you don't see the full implications of it. It took a while for the virtuous cycle to play out. The virtuous cycle of the web means each thing we did created value, therefore we created more capacity of the web, but then we discovered what else we could do with the capacity. I think that's much more important than Moore's law. It's actually a variation on the same thing, of sort of a market-driven abundance. If we take the entire telecommunications network and convert it into packets, we get abundance. You can use all the capacity, it becomes pull it all together, and suddenly all these wires. If you take a look at the day, remember the days of phone calls, you had these big bundles outside. You know the effective speed of a copper wire for a phone call
No, I do not.
is about 1 bit a second.
Okay.
It was 99% of the time it wasn't in use, but you had a
Right.
dedicated wire to each purpose. So on average, it was like 1 bit per second.
Right. Because so you have periods where you're getting a lot of data across it, but then you have whole hours where nothing goes across
We
it.
weren't even getting a lot by today's standards, but you're getting some. You had a voice
Mhm.
call, 56 kilobits reverso, the codec. You get abundance by saying, we're going to treat this all as a bits. The packets can use any available thing. You bundle the wire to get a matter of fact. I proposed uh, basically turning line cards at central office to be DSL line cards, all DSL, which would be the same cost. But by the 1990s, the electronics had moved so much, you didn't need somebody going out tuning everything. You can just use it. It's not about speed. It would have been maybe 1 megabit, which was high speed then. But the point is, it would have been created opportunity, and that would have rapidly driven the virtuous cycle for people who then want to invest and own the facilities. So by normalizing all the spectrum to packets, as we did the wires, suddenly we get abundance. So here's the problem. So go back to broadband. That broadband copper wire is no longer a service pipe. Okay, it's no longer a cost of doing business because the service is 100% decoupled from the use. So in that case, the better model is sidewalks and roads, not a billable service. So the economics of broadband is fundamentally broken. Worse, broadband creates scarcity because the business model of selling service no longer makes sense. So those are apps. Why are you paying a service fee to use that wire? The only sane model for that is you and your neighbors own the copper, just like you own your driveway, and the community owns the sidewalks. So, and that's very hard for people to wrap their minds around, which is why I want to understand it, but I want to find people who see the business opportunity in shifting the model. And right now, I've got 3 broadbands past my house, plus 3 cellular carriers, all whom can offer. I'm experimenting with the so-called home internet, wireless as well as wired. So basically, I've got 6 broadbands around me. How many do you need? How many electric grids do you have?
One.
And the importance of having one electric grid is that's what enables competition in energy sources. Otherwise, at the barrier to entry, you need to build your own facilities.
But let me, as we're about to wrap up, a note of skepticism. If we had been doing for the past 20 years, as you described, don't you think that we could have ended up in an area where we were more brittle because there wasn't a business model to build out
There is a
duplicative
business model. There is a
infrastructure?
business model.
But is there a business model to have both
Yes.
fiber and wireless? I mean, not fiber, but
Well,
to have
yes.
both a wire and a wireless service available?
Well, first, who cares whether it's wired or wireless? If wireless works, use that. If we need fiber, use that. I don't.
Well,
It,
but let me ask. So the question is, though,
there is a business
is
model.
if we say, well, we're going to be using all the infrastructures here, why would we go to the trouble of building out a new, like, who would be going to the trouble of building out a new, like, I guess,
I've got an answer. No, that's easy, trivially easy to answer.
Mhm.
Okay. What's the business model of a road?
I mean, roads typically built by local governments is to enable others to use them
Yeah,
to travel on, to move
right.
goods on.
And how much does a road cost?
Right. But no, here's the thing. That's the thing is that what I like about our system, imperfect as it is that when there's a problem with the wireline system, there's a wireless system I can jump on. And the thing is, nobody has a second driveway because they have the one
No,
driveway.
no, you're missing the point. Well, first you're making the case against broadband. Why do I have to confine to a pipe at all? Why didn't they just mix wired, wireless, without, why aren't they all just one fungible thing, one
Hmm.
resilience? The current business model doesn't do that because it requires preventing free riders. It's as if you put a turnstile between your house and the sidewalk.
Yes, no, and I get that, and I think it's really sharp. The question is, your system recognizes that a free rider is actually adding value, and we have a lot of
Yes,
benefits when everyone can use it.
it's a mindset issue. It's just like the days when
Mhm.
medicine was bloodletting. It was very hard to get rid of that. So let me answer. I'll give you the answer
Okay,
to that. So we put $1 million a mile into a road.
more than that, I would assume, but
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
much more than that.
It's $1,000 a mile or $10,000 a mile for fiber. Okay, $0 a mile for wireless. So what idiot is now working very hard to prevent us from using the wired and wireless facilities? Because even though the cost benefit is far larger than that road. Well, you can argue. But the point is, the business model is core infrastructure in economics. The
Hmm.
same business model as roads, same business model as sidewalks, except I argue that if you went to an infrastructure model, your costs would go down by 100%. Now, let's say I've got to say, six broadband simply consolidating a common infrastructure should reduce the cost by a huge margin. But we also pay for separate infrastructure, police, separate infrastructure, public safety. If we combine all these infrastructures, basically the cost of the broadband part that you see it becomes a trivial part of the mix. So a stable capitalistic business model says we've decoupled the value from the wire. The only business model of core infrastructure is core infrastructure, and all people put the copper in the support. All those people have businesses and get hired by the city, just like the city hires people. And people are the city can't maintain it. Well, it's so trivially easy that even a child can do it, compared with water work, sewers, and roads. Those are hard. So it's too trivially easy. And when you have resilience, so wire goes down. When a Comcast connection goes down, they roll a truck to my house because they don't have the protocols. They should call me to tell me. When my Verizon connection, I experimented with them, I never had a problem. First, I couldn't convince them because they pinged. The most powerful was ping. They pinged them. Thing it got through. There was something wrong internally. They couldn't detect it, but they did offer me a previous premium plan in which they would come in and fuck up my TV
Hmm.
because for them the TV is a value. They fundamentally don't. Now the big advantage Comcast has here is Comcast is out of the business because Comcast, the haberdashers, were always in the make money business. They had no problem becoming NBC. Verizon is proud of the networking expertise, so they got themselves into a hole. When AT&T and Verizon tried to get out of it by buying media companies, it did not end well. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So there's a very simple model I call it public packet infrastructure, which you start locally. And the key thing, though, is I realize I can't explain that to all the city municipal people. So what I'm trying to do is find entrepreneurs who want to start a business because it's so easy to disrupt telecom at this point. All it takes is to go to cities, offer them a deal. Here, we'll cover this for you. But remember, telecommunications business model is a loan you can never pay off.
We did cover that in 2014 as well. I was just reacquainting myself
I'm
with
glad
it.
you remember.
Yes.
Some of the problem is I keep repeating some of my story evolves and I get better at it. But yes, if I look back at some of the things I was trying to explain, way back then. But the problem is people don't understand finance.
No, I agree. And it's what drives me nuts. I mean, we're in a situation in which we pay far more than most people who actually, and they haven't even embraced your system, Bob. They just have a better system than we do in terms of their.
Yeah, they're at the wholesale retail prices, but in a sense, it's also they're stuck there because I think it's so perfect. When
Mhm.
really, they're using a railroad business model for roads.
Right. But we're stuck in this place, and I'm frustrated because I feel like it is extremely hard to get people to understand.
In a
The,
sense, I've given up, and I'm trying to reach out to entrepreneurs and people interested in doing it as a
Mhm.
business. Because I think trying to explain to people, as I've discovered over the last 30 years, is futile.
Yes.
Okay. So, and this is where to form a business, sort of, Uber, except with empathy, to basically go to cities. And there are companies that put in dark fiber now. But they're still stuck in the old model. We'll put in dark fiber, and then other people rent it. No, that's the wrong model. It's like going to city. Oh, we're going to put the streets in here, but we're going to put a toll booth in front of every house. and create the concept of unaffordable stroll.
Hmm.
You know, what you need is something more like the companies that do sewers or the people collect garbage for you that go to the city, say, we can do a better deal than you can now. So in a sense, and just think that here's the simplest model. Say you still got Comcast or franchise. You just go to a single payer model. A single payer model would mean you can then assume it as infrastructure. You can do connected healthcare. And I think the important part, reason earlier I mentioned the web was a driver, but the real value is in the device. It took a long time for people to understand how to build IP devices. Matter of fact, it's been very recently that I can start assuming, I like companies like Home Assistant, stuff that, help with that process. So initially people will just see cheaper internet. It's free broadband. It's wireless throughout the city, carry my devices. Now I could take, let's say, a glucose monitor, and it'll just work everywhere instead of my having to phone a big bucket brigade. I mean, you try to explain to somebody how to connect the pill bottle to the Bluetooth and everything. So instead, if we can assume open connectivity throughout the city, then you can start to do connected healthcare. But it's going to take a while for people to realize the value and see it because, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is insane. He sees things that aren't there.
All right, there's many other threads that I would like to pull, and I know that you're big into pull as well.
Yes.
But we're gonna wrap it there. Thank you, Bob, for sharing these thoughts. Now, I hope that there are people out there listening who are interested in trying to figure out how to make this model something that they can touch and feel.
Yes, I hope I didn't scare too many people. Okay, let's scare them. It's okay.
Yeah, as long as they come back.
Yes.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at communitynets.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Blue Sky. His handle is @SportShotChris. Follow communitynets.org stories on Blue Sky. The handle's @CommunityNets. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. You can catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Arnie Huseby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons.